The Doolittle Raid shocked the Japanese, making them no longer feel safe. We'll take a detailed look at what happened and what the consequences were. Support the channel by subscribing, commenting, and sharing this video. This topic is too serious to ignore. We stood on the deck of the carrier and said nothing. The wind off the ocean tore at our uniforms. Waves struck the hull as if testing our resolve. We all knew we were flying toward a place from which we might never return. But no one turned away. We had been waiting for this moment since that dark morning when smoke covered Pearl Harbor and the sea burned with American ships. Back then, America was silent. But that silence was not fear. It was a deep breath before the answer. That answer would be called the Doolittle Raid. Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle was not a man anyone had seen afraid. Short, composed, with the steady eyes of someone who counted odds instead of miles, he gathered his volunteers. No one was ordered to go. Each man stepped forward and said, "I'm ready." Everyone knew the truth. There was almost no chance of coming back. But that didn't matter. America had to prove to the world and to itself that defeat was impossible as long as courage still breathed. We would not be taking off from land, but from a carrier. The idea was madness, to launch heavy bombers from a short deck, meant for light fighters. But there was no other way. On the night before departure, no one slept. Mechanics worked through the dark, checking engines again and again. Navigators traced lines across maps. Pilots smoked quietly, staring into the black horizon where Japan waited, a nation convinced it was untouchable. Their leaders said no American plane would ever reach Tokyo. They believed the ocean was armor. They were wrong. At dawn, the Hornet turned straight into the wind. The sea rolled beneath us, and the deck glistened with spray. The planes stood in line, silver bodies marked with white stars. Pilots tightened their helmets, glanced at their instruments, and shook hands. Quick, firm, final. Words were useless now. The wind spoke louder than any farewell. Doolittle walked down the row, meeting every gaze. "We fly," he said quietly, "to remind them they are not beyond our reach." It was all that needed to be said. The first bomber edged forward, engines roared, the deck trembled, and the great machine lunged toward the sea. For a heartbeat it seemed to hang above the waves. Then it lifted, and cheers burst from the crew. He had made it. That meant it could be done. One by one, the Mitchells rose into the grey dawn, climbing through mist until the last disappeared into the clouds. We watched them go, knowing that the sound of those engines would mark a turning point in the war. The journey across the Pacific was long and merciless. Clouds shifted, fuel burned away, and there was nothing below but an endless field of blue. Each pilot stared ahead, unblinking. Mistakes here had no second chances. Behind them lay their homeland, before them the enemy, and between the two, only the sky. When the coastline finally appeared, silence filled the cockpit. Green hills slid beneath the wings, then roads, fields, and far beyond, Tokyo itself. No one spoke over the radio, only the steady hum of engines. Every man aboard understood. This was not just a flight, this was retribution. The sun broke through haze, roofs and streets came into view. The pilot gave the word, "Prepare to drop." The bombardier sighted the target. A few seconds later, the bombs fell away. Flashes ripped through the city blocks. For a moment, time froze. Then the sky over Tokyo bloomed with fire. America had reached the heart of the empire. Japan was stunned. Sirens wailed far too late. People ran into the streets, staring upward at the silver shadows crossing the sky. It was the instant when a nation's certainty cracked. For the first time, Japan understood that the war could reach their own homes. Doolittle kept his plane steady. He was not there to destroy, but to send a message. Each bomb carried the same meaning. America remembers. When the last plume of smoke faded behind them, the crews knew they would not make it back. Their tanks were nearly dry. Ahead lay China. Beyond that, hope maybe. But no one regretted the choice. They flew into fog and storms, fighting exhaustion and gravity. Some went down at sea, others crash-landed in empty fields. Men bailed out into darkness, their parachutes vanishing in the wind. Many were rescued by Chinese villagers who hid them from patrols, fed them, clothed them. Some were captured, some never returned. but every one of them became part of something greater than survival. They had proved that courage could cross an ocean. When news reached America, the nation erupted with pride. It was not a strategic victory, it was moral resurrection. The world saw that America had risen again. Newspapers shouted, "They struck the place that believed itself untouchable." In Japan, the shock was deeper than anyone admitted. The imperial staff realized their islands were no fortress. Commanders were replaced, defenses tightened, paranoia spread. They fortified every shore, expecting another attack that would not come for years. But the fear never left them. The ocean was no longer safe. Doolittle came home a hero, though he called the mission a failure. He had lost planes, men, and sleep. He blamed himself. But his country saw something else. They saw that fear could be shattered by the roar of engines. They saw that defeat was only a word. The raid became a symbol, proof that determination could outweigh despair. Japan tried to hide what had happened, but rumors spread like fire. People whispered in markets and alleys, "The Americans had been here. They had bombed our cities. They had reached us." For an empire raised on invincibility, it was like thunder from a clear sky. That day, Tokyo learned that the war would never again be distant. Looking at the photos now, what strikes you is not the planes, but the faces. Young men, smiling as if they already understood the price. Eyes that did not know fear, only duty. One pilot later said, "We did not fly for revenge. We flew to remind them. We're still alive." That was the heart of it. The Doolittle Raid did not break Japan's army, but it broke its illusion. And sometimes that is enough. After the raid, panic gripped Japan's command. They moved troops, shifted fleets, drained resources. That one bold act set off a chain reaction no one could stop. A nation that once dictated the tempo of war now fought to defend itself. And once a nation begins to defend, it has already begun to lose. Doolittle himself said later, "We knew we would not win a battle, but perhaps we could win back belief." And that is what the raid achieved. Belief. America ceased to be a wounded nation mourning Pearl Harbor and became a country moving forward again. That day lit the fuse of everything that came after. In Japan, families fled the cities, schools closed. Air raid sirens tested the skies. No one had imagined that bombers could cross thousands of miles of ocean to strike the capital. Elders whispered that the gods had turned away. Officials argued that the Americans would surely return. For the first time, people looked upward, not with pride, but with fear. Historians would later debate its military value. But for those who lived through it, that debate was meaningless. What mattered was the feeling that justice had finally stirred. Each plane that lifted off the Hornet carried a promise. We have not forgotten. Each fallen pilot became a reminder that freedom is costly but never wasted. When Doolittle returned, crowds greeted him as a legend. He smiled little. He said quietly, "It's not my glory. It belongs to those who took off knowing they might not return." He understood that history would remember the act, not the name. And that was enough. Many survivors later confessed they had feared not death, but failure. They did not want to come home empty-handed. They wanted to keep faith with every soldier lost at Pearl Harbor. And when the sky over Tokyo burned that morning, they knew the promise was kept. The Doolittle Raid became legend, not for its size, but for its spirit. It showed that even in the darkest moment, a few people could ignite hope. When the world seemed too vast, they took to the sky. And by doing so, they changed it. Japanese newspapers the next day wrote in careful lines, "Minor attack, limited damage." But between those words, fear lived. The emperor demanded answers. Generals blamed intelligence, blamed fate. But the truth was simple. No one had believed the Americans capable of daring. And once the enemy dares, the world shifts forever. Today, it is hard to imagine what that morning looked like. Wind across the deck, engines straining, the ocean stretching forever. 16 bombers against an empire. And somehow it was enough. Because sometimes history changes not through force, but through example. The raid forced Japan to pull forces back to guard the homeland, weakening their positions elsewhere. That single decision, born of fear, would echo in every battle that followed. And it all began here, with men who rose into rain and risk for duty's sake. Watch the old footage and you'll see it. No fear on the faces, only focus. Doolittle's gaze steady, calm, almost detached. He knew he was walking into history. He knew he might never walk out. But he went anyway. This story is not about machines. It is about belief, how a handful of people restored a nation's pride. How even in an ocean of despair, there is always one direction left: forward. Doolittle gave America not victory, but meaning. And that changed everything. Decades have passed, yet if you listen closely, you can still hear it. That low hum of engines above the sea. It lives in every story where a person chooses courage over comfort. It was never just a raid. It was a reminder that resolve itself can move mountains. And when the people of Tokyo watched their city burn that morning, they felt what Americans had once felt at Pearl Harbor: vulnerability. From that day on, they no longer slept easily, and the world would never be the same again. Tell me what you think. Could the war have been won without such men, men who flew towards certain death just to prove that fear could be conquered? Or were they the ones who kept history itself from collapsing into darkness? One truth is certain: from that day, the ocean was no barrier, and fear had changed sides.